Good morning, everyone. Take a seat. That got quiet very quickly. That shows we've got quite a number of visitors, and you're much more polite than the normal Southern Cross Community Church crowd. So well done. You're welcome anytime. Welcome to our Green Wedge lecture, I think number 5, but I didn't count. This is put on by Southern Cross Community Church, which meets here every Sunday, but today we replace it with a public lecture. So you are so welcome to come and hear, and I am so looking forward to introducing AJ in a moment. First of all, though, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. We respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. We pay respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge the significance of the history that has gone before us. And just in light of that, I will let you know that next month our public lecture is brought to you by an academic who is an expert in Indigenous affairs, and he's bringing a special guest with him, an elder from a Tasmanian vicinity who's also an academic and herself and leads a whole lot of progressive kind of initiatives, so I'm excited about that too. But let's stay with today for now, and I will let you know that the toilets, where you came in, the ladies is on the left and the men's is on the right, just outside of those doors if you need them. We are live streaming today, so you won't be seen on camera, but AJ will, and this is something that AJ just said, because there's so much content, you may want to review this afterwards. There's enough content that you'll look back and go, that's right. And hearing something twice is often better than hearing it once. So AJ is an academic private psychiatrist based at the Geelong Clinic. He's been on a long drive this morning. He received his medical degree, master's and doctorate from the University of Melbourne. His doctoral and postdoctoral work focused on blood-brain barrier pharmacogenetics. I think I said that correctly. He then founded a successful spin-off company, CNS Dose, which won funding from the University of Melbourne and Texas Medical Centre and was acquired by Insight Health in 2022. He's an author of the current and past RANZCP mood disorders clinical practice guidelines and is an honorary associate professor at Deakin Medical School. Now, I could go on, but AJ said, just stop it there. It's too long. And I said to him, you've just done too many things. So I will leave it there, but you can always Google him, let's be clear. So AJ, I just want to ask you 2 questions before we begin. We have begun. I want to ask you 2 questions. First is a big, open, broad one, and that is, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. How's the mic going? Can people hear me? Yeah. Good. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. When I was driving down, I thought, gosh, it's sunny. I didn't expect many people to turn up, so I appreciate you making time. And I've already forgotten your question, Sally.
Oh, so tell us a little bit about your background. I assumed when I saw your name that you would be someone who had not been born in Australia?
Yeah, so my background, so I just go by AJ for short. I was born in Mount Gambier, South Australia, would you believe? So I'm kind of like a multi-generational immigrant. And like a lot of people from India and China, immigration is the norm. So governance isn't necessarily the best in the homeland. So I'm very Australianised. My wife's name is Sharon. My son's name's Ryan. So it's kind of quite immersed. And then my background was we moved to Melbourne quite early. And I went to a school called Scotch College, which is one of those
little kind of
uppity,
tin pot schools.
Uppity elite schools. So I was there for 12 years. And then as you do, you go to Melbourne Medical School after if you do well, et cetera, et cetera. And then I went to Geelong because I married a Geelong girl. So kind of went back more for the sea change, tree change. That's my context. And I've got all the qualification feathers, but it's all about helping people. So I'm not really in love with the status feathers. I kind of like helping people, and that's why I'm here today.
I was going to say this is not your highfalutin crowd, as highfalutin as we all are. Like, we're amazing people, don't get me wrong, but your gifting us this morning is wonderful. Second and last question. In the midst of the complexity of the last couple of years, we know that there's a big drain on people of academic standard, people who are in the health industry, and you're still going, you're still practicing, you're still meeting with people regularly. I guess the question is, what drew you or what keeps you going in the midst of a really difficult time in history?
Yes, I'd say that, so the whole health system's falling apart. And I realised that was going to happen over a year ago. And then saying no to care demands is sometimes the kindest thing, because you've got to go the distance. So if you help people with suffering but you burn out after a year, the overall help you deliver in your lifetime is not that much. So it's almost cruel to be kind. So I realised quite early to not burn out. And that's paying dividends now. Multiple people are easing back their workload, whereas I'm continuing to go. So it's almost cruel to be kind. And then the fuel is helping people. So at the end of the day, if you have a passion for an area, it's its own anti-burnout. The trick is to be empathic but set limits. That's the real test. So I think those two ingredients, passion for helping people and being cruel to be kind in terms of not overloading and going the distance.
Excellent. Thank you so much, AJ. We are really looking forward to hearing from you. We hope to have time for questions at the end, so if you have questions as we go along, note them down unless you can remember them, and we should have an opportunity to hear at the end some answers to some questions. Thank you so much, AJ.
All right, that's terrific, and everything will be available online and slides. And when I was getting ready to give this talk, I realised the hardest talks are the simplest one to the lay audience. The highly technical talks are quite easy. You just chock it full of detail and papers and factoids. And one of the really, my test of an expert is somebody who can explain the complex simply, and you'll be the judges today if I'm an expert. We're in an era where everybody's an expert, and it's as if every opinion matters the same. Some say we're in a post-truth era, and there's kind of deception everywhere. It's hard to know what to listen to or not. My expertise is based on 18 years of treating patients. So the best best teachers I've had have been patients, and it would be thousands and thousands of cases of helping people successfully. But also I've got that plumage of, the academic titles, writing guidelines for Australia and New Zealand. So everybody, I think, now has to discern who they listen to, because there's so many voices now and there's a lot of confusion, and you'll make your decision, I think, based on if it adds up and it makes simple sense what we talk about today. And when I saw the kind of title that I'd given Sally, I thought, wow, I was shooting from the hip there, because the first whole thing is what's sane, what's insane. And so when I was sort of putting the slides together, I was going, wow, this is a doozy. What is mental health or sanity? So some of the talk will be actually my thoughts on what is sane, insane mental health. And that frames everything that follows. And then some very pithy self-help tips and managing the system tips. Everybody's got advice on mental health. It's an excess of advice. And I'll just be giving my highlights of what really cuts through for you to decide whether that becomes part of your shortlist. So I'm going to break it into 4 sort of sections. What is sane? Has the world gone mad? Self-care tips and navigating the system. And with any question, you never assume the premise of the question's right if you're really interrogating for truth. So the first 2 things I'm actually checking, was my question even valid? So what is sane? Well, I thought, okay, we'll Google it. And you get the standard, dictionary definitions. This is like Cambridge Dictionary, the state of having a healthy mind and not being mentally ill. So basically it doesn't explain it, it just says the absence of mental illness. So it says, look to mental illness. And also good judgment. So we often will say somebody who's got good mental health or sanity has got a degree of wisdom. And that was kind of that famous quote Einstein said, you know, insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome. So something about functionality, judgment, mental health. And then what is mental health? So there's all these different, in the US, the CDC, the World Health Organization, they give these broad definitions, and the definition here is mental health includes our emotional, psychological and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others and make healthy choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life. Although the terms are often used interchangeably, poor mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. A person can experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with a mental illness. So basically it's everything, and the definitions are really not that helpful. You know, like you read that and think, well, it's like The Vibe. It's like Marbo, The Vibe, that movie, The Castle sort of thing. And so it's very broad. And I think if you can't define something, do you even understand what we're talking about? So I think this is one of the problems. Everybody talks about mental health and mental illness, sanity, insanity, but you know, how do we make sense of what it is? I think for the audience here and the population at large and the world at large, often what we're talking about is resilience, which is now an overused word, but it's basically about adapting or adjusting. And so I think you know, there is that capacity to adjust to adversity, bounce back, is probably the most common interpretation of what mental health is. So therefore, each of us has a capacity to endure adversity and bounce back. Nobody has got to this point in life without hardship. And we've got a frame of reference of how we bounce back. And when we're bouncing back pretty well, we would say, I'm mentally healthy for me. So you have your own definition. I'm mentally healthy for me, i.e. my resilience fuel tank is pretty good. I'm bouncing back from disappointments. Or for me, I'm not at my best. I'm not bouncing back or resilient like I used to be. Suddenly massively more usable definition, isn't it? And this is what we all secretly do. How are you going? When people, are you okay? Well, I think often what they're saying is, are you bouncing back good? Is your bounciness good? Are you particularly bouncy at the moment? You know, or you're cracking with every adversity. So I think actually there is no one definition. It has to be your definition of mental health, bouncing back, resilience. Suddenly this makes more sense. Suddenly it's like I'm talking to each one of us, including me here. And so that's exciting. So I think that I'm hoping that's going to be useful, even that sort of take on what is mental health sanity. The other sort of thing that overlaps is well-being. And you know, mental, emotional health, physical health, but there's also social health and spiritual health. And a lot of people, particularly through the pandemics and lockdowns, were really kind of left isolated, wondering what life's all about. Do we die and is that it or not? So their existential framework, their spiritual framework was crucial. Some people got a lot of comfort from their religious faith, their belief systems. Others didn't have that or didn't get comfort from it. And then others let their physical health go, comfort eating, sitting on the couch, watching YouTube and Netflix. And then that also impacts your mental health as well, your social health. So we're basically, the way we became apex predator in the savannah of Africa is by working in groups. The cave person alone got eaten by a lion. The cave person in a group ate lion. So it's kind of primordial. It's deeply built into us to feel safe as part of a group. And when that was removed in spectacular fashion in Melbourne Metro, it had huge impacts. And the thing with this kind of well-being is it's that orchestra of factors. You've got your bounce back, you've got your little tribe, you've got your belief system, you know, you've got your physical health. And when it's all humming along, they self-reinforce. When your head's good, then you're doing your healthy eating and exercising. You're doing a bit of chit-chat in the way that works with a group. You have your belief system of what makes a good soul or a good citizen. And it all they all feed off each other. And when you get that real momentum firing, then you're well. And that's what I think what we aspire to, and at times glimpse it. So I think each of us will have our definition of optimal well-being we've experienced in our lifetime, when it was all really firing, and it's probably those 4 dimensions we're all firing, and we want to recapture that. So I think that a very self-dependent definition of health, sanity, resilience, well-being, and you've got your own personal best that you're trying to get to, or maybe even exceed in the future. Now, the whole psychiatric diagnosis system is made up. So it's non-specific syndromes that we try and guesstimate who's got what to match them to treatments that'll help, and the prognosis, the outcome. But there's no blood test or X-ray to prove anything. So it's kind of guesstimates with an agenda to try and match people to what's going to help and give them a heads up to what to expect. But it can be very unclear. And so there are some things in psychiatry and mental health that are black and white. So for example, not everybody will have had a panic attack. And the way to describe a panic attack would be the feeling of going bungee jumping, but you haven't gone bungee jumping, you're just at the supermarket. And then suddenly you're sweating and shaking and you feel you're crazy because you're feeling like that just after walking down an aisle. So that would be a black and white or categorical phenomena. But everybody's had anxiety. Everybody's had anxiety. And so that would be more what we call a dimensional or shades of grey phenomena. Everybody gets degrees of anxiety. A little bit of anxiety is good, like a little bit of performance anxiety makes you hopefully sharper for a talk. Too much frazzles you. Or the other way of putting it is not enough anxiety and you're rust out, life gets boring, a bit dry. And then too much stress and anxiety, you burn out. And so there are a lot of things that are spectrum, less things that are categorical. And the big ticket ones, things like your bounce back, your resilience, your mood, feeling happy or depressed, manageable stress or stress burnout, they tend to be shades of grey spectrums. So what that means is we're all sane and we're all insane. You see, not all of us will get panic attacks or auditory hallucinations of schizophrenia. That's categorical, it's rarer. But all of us will have shades of mental health. And so it's kind of nice, we're all crazy and we're all sane. And there's an honesty to that. And that's those very common things, stress, anxiety, mood. It's a spectrum. And going back to your personal best, how's your mood for you? So the other trap is you can't compare apples and oranges. And what do I mean by that? Well, this would be my ideal view of myself with my shirt off. And so the mental equivalent would be like being a Jacinta Ardern or somebody who can run a country and be compassionate and be composed and have a baby. And it's like, if I tried to do half of that, I'd have a breakdown. Like for me, it's just not possible. The reality is our role models are often super copers for a variety of reasons. It doesn't mean we're all going to be Schwarzenegger with our ability to tolerate stress or have mental well-being readily. This is the average kind of man in a morph of all US men. And so the reality is, yeah, we all have limits to how much stress we can handle. Not all of us are going to be super copers. So you can, just like with physical appearance, you can be down on yourself because you're not Schwarzenegger or a supermodel, but that's kind of a bit pathological in of itself. The truth is we all have limits, and what I say to people is you've got to push your limits and respect your limits, and not all of us are going to be super copers. So then what's your frame of reference? Your life till now. Your normal zone of mood, coping. Are you below that? Are you in actually setting new record territory of coping with more than you used to? Sorry?
The Superman complex.
Yeah. So,
There are people like sometimes today, I'm Superman.
yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, so I think it's important to operationalise the definition of sane, insane mental health, resilience around you, and realising that the average person is not going to be Prime Minister and be able to manage with everything. So it's very much an individual, operationalised, personal definition of mental health. And I don't think I've ever heard that before. So I'm sufficiently qualified now to make up stuff. you know, and if it's helpful as opposed to the wishy-washy definitions, great. So this is quite important. Even in ordinary times, some people struggle. So I remember before the pandemic, there were plenty of grumpy people. You know, like I remember in 2019, there were lots of unhappy people. So even in good times, there are a lot of people who are struggling to be okay with themselves and life and function. And that group tends to deteriorate even more in adverse times, particularly prolonged adverse times. But in adverse times, prolonged adverse times, many more slip over into that state. So using physical conditions as an example, we all might have a risk of diabetes, but if we all gain 20 kilos, more will slide into diabetes. And the equivalent for mental health is stress, chronic persistent stress. More of the population slides in. And then the last point on that slide is adjustment stress is normal. So the most common diagnosis I've seen through the pandemic, we'd call it adjustment disorder. So it's just a fancy way of saying there's a lot on your plate and you're struggling, and then when it gets quite berserk and you're dysfunctional and having dark thoughts, we call it clinical. But before that, it's adjustment reaction. And so like the pandemic was, and other things that are happening, was not normal in our lifespan. And if you were fine with it, I'd be worried about you. Whereas if you were saying, oh, I'm a bit concerned, I'd be going, well, good, and but they're not over concerned. So one of the things of the mental health would be you don't want to overreact or underreact. So calibrating your reaction is super tricky. How much should you freak out? Like now it's monkeypox. How much should we worry about monkeypox? What's clickbait hysteria? What's reasonable preparation? What's denial? What's hysteria? So again, you can see it's tricky, and it's sort of shades of grey. So I hope that gives a richer sense of how to define mental health for you, particularly around your ability to spring back and what's normal for you, whether you're having issues in normal times anyway, and they're amped up by abnormal times, or if you never did and suddenly you're having issues, which in a way is more of a challenge. It's a hit to your ego and identity. If you were always somebody who coped and then all of a sudden you're struggling, it's actually more to embrace that. Oh, maybe I'm struggling. It's always easier if somebody else has a mental issue rather than you. And if it's your first time having difficulty coping, it can be much harder to embrace that and seek help, much easier to deny it. And so has the world gone mad? The next premise of everything. Well, I remember January 2020, I couldn't see out my window in Geelong because of smoke from far away. So we've had you could say like they're biblical, epic fires and floods, but even deeper, the whole existential angst. Existential angst is really things that could kill you. And sometimes that's imagined, sometimes it's plausible. It's like over the next 100 years, does climate change seem likely? Yeah. Could it kill you? Yeah. Could it cause mass starvation, flooding, wars? Yeah. Is it already? I think so. Is that likely to get worse? It looks like it. So it's actually the existential threat of climate change is an increasing stressor, particularly for younger people. So if you're a teenager looking at the next 50 years of living, it may be a bit grim. So that's a particular stressor of the era we're in, climate change. Obviously the pandemic, and the thing about the pandemic is it's not going away as quickly as we were told. We were very obedient, but it's turning out to be trickier than we thought, so it's lingering. And certainly the pandemics happened through history, but because of international travel and the media cycle, the viral spread and the mental impact is unprecedented in history. Often people say, oh, Spanish flu and so on. They're right, there was Spanish flu and other things, but it didn't go like wildfire because not everybody was jumping on planes, back then. And also the news cycle was berserk. Back in the day, it was newspaper once a week or something. So there were unique impacts different to any other pandemic in history. And a huge socio-cultural impact. So this is Victorian Parliament. Like it's hard to comprehend. It was almost like a war zone. I mean, I remember there were riots in Melbourne and several police officers had broken arms. And it was the middle of the day, there was no alcohol involved. And I was thinking, wow, okay, so trying to calibrate, are we hysterical or is it actually major? I think you can say, yeah, it's valid that we can say that it was a major shock, quite unusual within our scope of experience. So if you remember how I was talking about your own definition of resilience, mental health, we've got unprecedented testing. Yeah, so when it's an unprecedented testing, if you get a bit wobbly, it may be because of the unprecedented testing, not your inherent fragility increasing. And this is very important to figure out what's going on. So there's definitely been a lot of unprecedented testing with the pandemic. Homeschooling was one of the major things that burnt out families. It's very difficult to teach when you're emotionally overinvested in your child's outcome. So things like that were unusual. That wasn't there in the Spanish flu because we didn't have the facility. So there's some things that technology have brought as stressors as well. Wasn't there like almost a war in Israel? There's so much happening, but I'm pretty sure this actually happened last year. These incredible, surreal images of missiles, and I thought, we're dying of a pandemic and people are shooting each other, and then just as a follow-on, it's like it is the Russians now, and it's kind of like, am I psychotic? Is this actually happening? It's very surreal, the sequence. So what's the point? Well, you don't want to be hysterical and dysfunctional about it, but then equally you don't want to invalidate the fact that yes, it's uncharted testing of my bounce back, my mental health. So you want to validate that, but also try and keep perspective. And now we've got inflation. So I bought a little thing of blueberries the other day. I think it was $15. And I was thinking, that's crazy. So of course, what we're coming up to now might be, this is Sri Lanka storming the parliament, economic hardship in the aftermath of all the money printing to get through the pandemic, leading to civil unrest, mortgage pressure, defaults, mortgagee auctions. So what we know from the GFC is a lot of the mental problems that arose were as a result of fiscal hardship a couple of years later, after the golden handshakes had been eaten through with people losing their work and getting a payout. Then there was adversity. So I don't want to be depressing, but there's stuff happening. So I think we have the right to say it is slightly a world gone mad. And it's almost like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So it's kind of like one thing after another. So a lot of people are sort of in that sort of thinking, what next? And there's a hypervigilance. We're almost waiting for normal to come back. So in our normal life experience before the last couple of years, you'd have a life kerfuffle. I like the word kerfuffle. And then you just wait 6 months and things would normalise. You have a fight with a friend and then just wait 6 months and it's fine. Things are not normalising, it's getting on to 2.5 years. So it's like this sequence, and that's also part of what's overwhelming. So multiple events in the sequence. However, world history gives us a framework. We're not the only generation for the world to be upside down. It's a fact, and it's some comfort, not to invalidate our hurt at adjusting to everything, but also to draw strength from generations we'll never speak to directly, who are in the history books, who got through the Great Depression, the world wars, plagues and famines. So we come from strong stock. We are the children of people who survived major stuff. That's comforting to know, but not to the point of invalidating the challenges we have to juggle things. Because self-invalidation is almost like a self-neglect for the hardships we're feeling, but then you don't want to be overwhelmed. So that calibrating, yep, it's hard, I'm valid to be wobbled, but yep, I come from a long line of cave people who survived. And so there's a blend of validation, but strength from knowing that. Now this slide is taken from other natural disasters. There was a pre-existing literature, this is from the year 2000, about major disasters like volcanoes and earthquakes. And basically, it's quite interesting. They talk about sort of the pre-disaster, the build-up, like COVID's coming. Then there's heroic phase where we'll get through it together, and I will knit masks and work extra at the hospital to help people. And then you get through it, and then you crash, and then there's this slow reconstruction. What we're seeing with COVID is something much worse, unfortunately, in terms of adjustment. Hit, more hits. So this is bad. So resilience is a bit like a paperclip. When you bend it one way, then the other, then the other. Eventually it just breaks. So this is another thing to validate that, because we're getting hit after hit after hit. It's like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's like bang, 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 bang. It's putting a lot more brake pressure. More people are braking than I've ever seen in my career. It doesn't mean they're weak, it's just they've taken a lot of hits. Even a lot of politicians, you've noticed, are sort of happily fading out of politics now. They're the Schwarzenegger super copers. Even they're tapping out and saying, oh, I'm not going to stand for election. I'm just going to retire. They don't officially say I'm at my limit. But that's actually, I think, what's going on as well. So again, it's a bit doom and gloomy, but to validate that if you're struggling, you're not alone, doesn't mean you're weak. Acknowledging the hardship can add to the sense of being overwhelmed, which is bad. The good thing is it validates that I'm wobbled for good reason and I'm not weak, and that can make you feel better about yourself. So validating it is a tough world currently, I think, is essential. It doesn't mean we've resigned. We're not saying I'm waving the white flag, but we're saying, yep, I'm finding it hard and it's valid. I'm not a weakling, but I'm going to keep going. And not over or underreacting. So this is there's no perfect answer, it's a dilemma. Am I overwatching the news? Am I underwatching the news? There was a time I had to watch the news every day just to see if I could go out. Like that actually happened, and it lasted a long time. I remember one Saturday I was free in the morning, by 11 I couldn't go out. That was last year, that happened to us in Victoria. So that trained a bit of over news watching, but then now the temptation just to not watch news for a month, is that necessarily adaptive, or is that now denial? So again, there's no perfect answer, but you can overlook at information and become hyper-vigilant, overlook at it, or you can not look at it all and be in denial. And both extremes lead to suboptimal preparation and adjustment. Some are over-prepared and burn out from the over-preparation. Some are under-prepared and then don't even know they're meant to get a vaccine booster or something, or don't even think about it. And then what matters is your world. So focusing on what you can control. So like often I'll look at the news and go, well, if I was in charge of the world, I'd do this. But then I go, well, hang on, you're not in charge of the world. But I am in charge of my world, like, to an extent what I do. So it's actually, if the world's falling apart, that's one thing. But the real question is, how's your little bubble of control going, your world? And I think this is the great opportunity. If the world is going mad, or it's an unusually sequenced set of disasters, unique in our lifetime, not unique in history, although arguably a bit unique in history as well, things like climate change. But what's your little bubble? Can you make your bubble sufficiently awake to the bigger world and adaptive, but also happy in its own little sphere of what I can control and do? And this is the opportunity. So this is where I think self-care tips come in. So a sense of mental health that's around you and adjusting and what's normal for you, and are the times tough, and does that validate you struggling? The world's grim, but you can have your own little bubble world, and the two need to interact to an extent, but not too much or too little. So you can see the framing of it is really important. So I'm hoping when you hear the term mental health next time, you'll have a much more useful framework from some of these ideas, which aren't broadly out there. So I was kind of thinking of everybody has mental health expertise, as we all have stress issues and we all develop a coping repertoire, and everybody has their go-tos. And I was thinking, what are some of the real cut-through ones that are high yield? And I'll talk about them, but it's managing screen time, beware the slippery slope of alcohol, balance work, rest and play. That's the Mars bar philosophy that's not only sweet but wise. expectation discussions, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Perspective discussions, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. You won't see that anywhere else, but I think they could be two life-saving things. And head to health websites. So a lot of your tax dollars have gone to this massive online site that will empower you, quote unquote, to have online resources, but also free phone counselling resources. Most people don't access it, so there's more availability than you'd think. And that's all self-dictated. You're not reliant on others to provide it for you. You can initiate it. So the news is not what it was. There used to be a profession called journalism, and the business model went out. The business model became clickbait. So doom and gloom catches eyeballs that then can be brainwashed with advertising. This is the business model now. So media is not what it was in the new era, and you need to be awake to that. Particularly like even social media, things like YouTube algorithms feeding you what you're looking at can reinforce the sense that the whole world sees things the way you do, leading to imbalanced perspectives. So if you like YouTube up, the world is ending, then it gives you 50 videos and suggests 50 more the next day and 50 more the next day, and you can get a false impression that everybody agrees the world is ending, which may actually not be the balanced opinion of most people. So there's a real sensationalism in media that leads to hypervigilance, that leads to being glued to the screen, that leads to advertising revenues. So it's all very dark, isn't it? And I often say to people, follow the money to make sense of things. And so if things aren't massively end of the world-ish like they were with lockdowns on and off, we needed to know, once or twice a week might be plenty of news time. And then it's entirely valid to go outdoors or just watch some brainless movie or something. And you really do need to police it because it creeps in there, almost like an addiction. And that's also how it's designed. The slippery slope of alcohol, I've treated countless alcoholics over the years, and they look just like you and me. The imagination is they'll be unwashed, unshaven for weeks, smelling of alcohol. No, they just look like you and me. What happens is a glass at night became two, became a bottle, and then they're scared to admit it became 2 bottles every night to sleep. And so the slippery slope of alcohol, it's nothing to do with, having the big bottle. It's the sequence. And about 20%, liquor lands in Victoria are up about 20%. So during the pandemic, there was no public health messaging about don't become a pandemic alcoholic. In my opinion, it was a gross failure of the messaging at the time. They should have had ads saying, don't become a pandemic alcoholic, keep an eye on your drink. They didn't do it at all. So there were great deficiencies. And now we've got 20% of people who are now permanently buying more alcohol. So it means there's 20% more alcoholics. And that's probably going to increase if there's financial hardship coming up, like mortgage defaults. And the time to catch it is here. And it can happen to anybody. So it's important to remember the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous was a stockbroker and a surgeon. So like it affects the whole spectrum, of people. And I'd very strongly say this is when you're going to win. When you notice you're going there and say, nah, I'm going to have a few days no alcohol or a dry July or whatever, that's when you win. Prevent. Makes a massive difference. By the time you're up here, you're in a whole world of trouble. And unfortunately, this has been a missing message in public health. You find wisdom in strange places? Like my whole career is helping people navigate life and the meaning of life and suffering and Mars bar. Work, rest and play. I often remind myself, okay, I'm a bit of a workaholic, hang on, where's the rest and play? Rest and play is really important. We have downtime, so we feel like, okay, I've got to spend all the time with the kids because I've been a missing in action parent, guilt. But hang on, I need rest so I'm not a burnt out parent. I need the me time so I'm not a burnt out me, so I can be a non-grumpy parent, loved one, friend, partner. So the work, rest, play mixes, there's a genius in it. And be selfish for me time so you're not a burnt out version of you. And if your loved ones guilt you, hey, you're selfish doing your me time, what about the family? Just say, because of the family, I don't want to be a burnt out grumpy me. And I need to carve in some me time so I'm not grumpy me. Massive dividends, just that simple realisation. And this is a big issue now with people working more to pay mortgages and afford, punnets of blueberries at the supermarket and things like that. So be selfish for me time. Like I said, I've continued working because I was selfish to say, no, I can't take another patient. Otherwise I'll burn out. I want to go the distance. No, I can't do 5 family functions tomorrow. Otherwise I'll be grumpy at all. I need a bit of me time so I'm not grumpy. And you've got to set that boundary. Big difference to your life will result. Expectation discussions are important with the people you love, so your family, the people you care about. What do we expect from life? And so, like we're sold a lie that you can find heaven on earth. One of my lines to people is, we're all looking for heaven on earth. We only ever find earth. Even like the dream holiday, there were too many mosquitoes, or the price of the bottled water was ridiculous. There's always something. So if you don't expect heaven on earth, you'll be less recurrently disappointed. And if you have that discussion as a group, it's like the tribe think is like, yeah, we don't expect everything to go perfectly to plan. It makes you a bit more resilient when your expectations are more in line with reality. And then also kind of catastrophization. This is crucial, I think, for safety. So if I lose my job and lose the house, therefore I must die. I mean, I think a lot of people think that way, and it's very dangerous later if they go off the deep end. Whereas if you sit down with your loved ones and say, well, if we lost the house, we could be happy in a caravan. In fact, maybe we'd be happier. There's less to clean. And so if you can have those dialogues with people you care about, the what ifs, if I lose all my money, if I lose my career, if I'm, whatever, will it be the end of the world or not? Because when it's unspoken, we tend to harbour it will be the end of the world more. And these are the little seed thoughts that later on, if you're in a dark place, can be fatal. So you see early on, if you have that discussion with your family, what would a catastrophe look like? Particularly mortgage pressure, for example. Would it be the end of the world if you had to sell the house? A lot of people think it would, but when you have that discussion, you might discover your loved ones love you anyway. Or you would adjust together, or you work through the fear together. This is just a clip of the Head to Health website. A lot of websites are pushed. This is actually a hub that's got a heap of government-funded stuff, i.e. you're funding it through your taxes. It's poorly utilised, and there's numerous different self-help things and phone lines. And you just Google Head to Health, and it comes up, and it's massive. And it's underutilised, and you don't have to wait in a queue to see a GP or a therapist. It's sort of there online. So it's actually worth knowing about. Again, there should be more ads about it, just like don't become an alcoholic during the pandemic ads. But unfortunately there aren't. So I have to alter my expectations of government. See that expectation management? I used to think government would sort everything. How foolish I. You see, and therefore I'm not grieved that I find these deficits. I go, okay, I don't expect better. So that's how that expectation management works. Navigating the system is hard. So I've never seen the system so broken, and I'll tell you why. Healthcare is always busy, and there's a surge and then a lull, surge and then a lull. In the lull, you regroup. There's no lull now. Surge, surge, surge. Even soldiers get tours of duty. I've got a number of paramedics who are patients. They're being crushed. Soldiers would never be treated that way. You do a tour of duty, then you recharge. So like even the toughest SAS bloke needs a bit of a recharge time, and it's engineered in. Otherwise the fighting force becomes weak and you lose. That's why they do it. Other frontline health workers, nothing. It's just constant surge, surge, surge. And we thought by now it would be downtime. It's not. It's bedlam in the hospitals. So a big reason why people are burning out is it's this endless surging. And so you have to now have the expectation that it's a burnt out, partially broken system more than usual now, unfortunately. The reality is it looks to be a chronically burnt out, more dysfunctional system than we've ever seen in our lifetimes. So then the grief accepting that, and then your expectancy is, okay, it's going to be far from ideal. I've got to navigate it, so that when you find shortcomings, you're not aggrieved. You go, oh, damn it, okay, I'll have to navigate. If you're aggrieved and start complaining, you just waste energy instead of putting that into navigating it. So expectation management. Knowing when you need to help is crucial because early intervention works better than late. I'll touch on what the system is very briefly, and again, these slides will be online so you can look at them. Go early, not late. Embracing telehealth, it's the new norm. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but there's a massive efficiency dividend. In the old days, you'd have to earmark a half day to see the doctor or therapist. Now you can just earmark an hour. So it's ongoing now, and it's not going to go away. And persistence pays to getting help. So early warning is crucial. So remember I was talking a bit about sitting with the family if you lost the house due to mortgage default, not thinking you should die is very important for later. You need to seek help before you lose perspective. What kills people is loss of perspective. Loss of perspective doesn't happen overnight. Over months and years, you get so bleak that then it's logical to end it, which it isn't logical, but it becomes logical, and not overnight, after months and years of going down that slippery slope. So in the early phase, that's the opportunity, and the key is to know yourself. So remember the definition of mental health is individualised. Am I bouncing back like I used to or not? And when you don't recognise yourself, you're in uncharted bad bounce back territory, get help then. One of the strongest measures of being mentally okay is sleeping well most nights and waking up fresh. If most nights of the week you sleep well and wake up fresh, you're fine. If you're suddenly getting chronic insomnia that's unusual for you, you're waking up exhausted and it's compounding, it's a very scary early warning sign, and you should have a discussion with your GP. There are many non-addictive pills that can be used. So the sleep hygiene and a more comfy pillow is great, but if you're getting chronic insomnia, having a discussion with your GP, could I have something? Even melatonin, which is over the counter, now can make a difference. So if you're getting chronic insomnia, red flag. If you're not bouncing back and you're in uncharted bad non-bounce back territory, red flag. Begin a dialogue with your GP at that point, rather than downstream when you lose perspective. The system is, this is a busy slide, you'll be able to get it online. Basically, there are 3 phases of mental health care. So there's primary care. So a lot of that we call expectant management. So GPs are the experts at knowing when to worry. By the time they send you to a specialist, as a specialist, we know something's up because the GP's filtered it all. GPs are the experts at knowing when to worry. And initially, just a bit of TLC time, something for sleep, and a couple months later, you're coming good. You're getting back to your normal bounce back range of mental health. And so the first phase is GP and psychology as well. So there's much better access to psychology, but now that's also saturated. So that initial phase is usually the first 4 to 6 weeks that you want to engage while you're noticing you're going downhill in a bad way. And if you don't initiate it, then you're not going to get those early intervention opportunities. People are much more treatable early on. It's like anything in healthcare generally. This next phase is specific primary care. So that's when they go, okay, you're not just bouncing back with a bit of TLC and melatonin for sleep. And then rather than letting it go for months, you need to pipe up. Remember, everybody in the health system is too busy now. They want to be less busy, but they're not. So if you want really precise care, you got to initiate it. So I wish it wasn't so. I wish we could all chaperone you. It's not going to happen. You got to self-chaperone or have loved ones do it. And if you're not getting anywhere after a few months, pipe up. It's not good enough. I need more help, doctor. What do we do next? You got to initiate it. You can no longer be passive because we just don't have the capacity to micromanage you anymore. This is a very important tip. So if you're going worse after a couple, 2-3 months, you pipe up for more help, and you might be discussing, do you have an antidepressant or do you get psychological counselling? More specific things to say, yes, I have depression or anxiety or an adjustment disorder. And then the last step in care is seeing people like me, psychiatric care. ideally within 9 months of things deteriorating. Usually we see people 2, 3, 4, 10 years into their story in a really train wreck way, and by then it's much harder to resuscitate things. So if you're like really struggling and it's like 9 months has gone by, you can say, should I be seeing a psychiatrist? And then they'll say, okay, we'll book you and you'll get in 6 months. So my wait list is 6 months. And then the hospitals, if you call them in crisis, they'll say, I'll just go home. I mean, that's how bad things are at the moment. So it's no newsflash. We don't want it to be that way. It shouldn't be that way in an ideal world, but it is. The way you beat the system is you start early. So before you're deep in the red zone 2 years in, you already started the journey a year ahead of the pack, and then you're more likely to get timely care. This is a busy slide. Basically, there's a thing called adjustment disorder. It's the most user-friendly diagnosis. If life stress gives you a mental kerfuffle, we call it adjustment disorder. So there's the minimum stigma. I have adjustment disorder. Everybody gets adjustment disorder when we're not functioning particularly well. When it's to the point that we're really losing our capacity to cope, we call it a condition. And then, so you can even ask people, might I have an adjustment disorder? Most people don't know that term. Not everybody's going to have major depression or an anxiety disorder. A lot of people are going to have adjustment disorder when they default on the mortgage, when there's a World War III event or something. And so the importance is it should settle when the stress settles, but the stress is not settling now. And so this is why a lot of people are going to need more help than under usual times. So it's just good to know that term, adjustment disorder. Telehealth is not everybody's cup of tea, but it's much more time efficient. So it enables somebody like me to do outreach. So if somebody's having a difficulty, I can just call them. And so it's here to stay. It's baked into Medicare now. Get used to it. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but get used to it because it will help you access sooner rather than later. And later means you're deeper in that deep end of losing perspective. And so it's not going to go away. It's just been enshrined this year long term. And this little picture was about persevering, which is the last sort of point for today. In an ideal world, we should have instant, bespoke, user-friendly, case-managed care. We're not in an ideal world, and I'm not sure when there's going to be an ideal world coming. We may have seen peak civilization. Who knows? Time will tell. So you have to actually be a persistent bastard. And it might be hard to get a foothold in the system. You keep on, but when you find a little crack and you can grow into it, that's also how you win. So the persistent strategic patient who self-case manages, accesses early, knows the key time to hassle their GP more, when to ease back, they're the ones that find that little nick in the armour to grow a good care package, like that little shrub. So it's really, it is a hard world. What matters is your world. There are people who are still carrying on and actually okay with life despite the adversity because their world's going okay, but they're not in denial of the world. So you can be aware of the grim things in the world, but you can have your own little bubble that's functional and can find fulfillment. And if this goes for years and years, they're the ones who are going to still get satisfaction despite these times. So you know that saying, it was the best of times and the worst of times? So sometimes these hard times force people to think, what's my core values? What matters to me? What's my little world with my loved ones? Talking about it and creating it. In ordinary times, I don't always do that. So there is upside, believe it or not, if you can actually build a more flowery your world around what's happening. And then I'll end with this I was going through resilience and coping, and then the Google search of all the images sent up this serenity prayer, which many of you will be aware of, and it's a famous prayer from the 1930s from a Christian theologian, and you can Google it up yourself, but the words in it are very beautiful, and when I actually looked at it, it's actually psychiatrically sophisticated. So it goes, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. So grief accepting, like the health system is broken, so I've got to navigate it instead of fighting it. So grief acceptance, courage to change the things I can. So not to cop out of everything, wave the white flag. Stuff you can do, like talk to your family about mortgage stress and would it be the end of the world. And wisdom to know the difference. So that's the thing. Am I overreacting, underreacting? So I was kind of reading that thinking, wow, there's nothing new under the sun. It's all in there. Living one day at a time. So that's very mindfulness in the now, not thinking 10 steps ahead all the time. Enjoying one moment at a time. So that's very much mindfulness. Shutting out the endless to-do list and what-if list to just enjoy the sun on your face. So mindfulness is there, 1932. Accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, or realising there is hardship in life. We're looking for heaven on earth, we only find earth. So expectation management, like I was saying. So I was thinking, wow, it's all in there. And then a spiritual belief. So whether your belief is, in God and a religious structure and being right with that, or if it's being a good citizen, a good friend to the earth, compassionate to others. Being in sync with that gives you a meaning beyond yourself, which helps you to transcend. So that's all in there as well. And so sometimes the oldest wisdom is the best. And I can see why that serenity prayer, even nearly 100 years after it was first written, still makes sense. It taps all those elements of well-being. And with that note, I'll end, and we have a few minutes for questions.
Just one quick question. On the slippery slope, could you add another slide, if that's possible, about the impact of gambling?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people could be sliding into that space.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Here, AJ, but just for the sake of people on live stream, if you can reiterate the question when you answer it. Not that it was a question,
Oh,
but
yeah.
sort of framed in that way.
Yeah, so that is a great question. Like, it's not just addiction to alcohol, pokies addiction, comfort eating, and a lot of people, when they're struggling, they embrace their dysfunctional coping repertoire. So comfort drinking, comfort eating, comfort gambling, which then is toxic, destroys you. So there are many different ways. Comfort eating is probably the most common. I think most people have got the COVID kilos, and so those sort of self-destructive things. And the time to get in is early on, when you've lost $100, not 1,000 at the pokies, or gained 2 kilos, not 20 kilos. So it's the same principle. So that's a good point. There are multiple different addictions that can happen.
Just from a bird's eye point of view with the health system that's in crisis, can it be fixed, or are people working to fix it? Is it just politicians that can fix it, or are there individuals that we can do, things that we can do to help? Or
Yeah, so the system is people. You're not going to double the number of adept doctors, nurses, therapists overnight. So there's a finite pool of people and they're spent. So unfortunately, I think they're going to be less than at their best for some time. And the sleight of hand of reforming the system doesn't change the fact that the system is people and they're all spent. So really, I think what will improve the system is if there are periods of normalcy where people can regroup. If there's 6 months without a new strain, 6 months without a new drama, then a lot of people will start to recharge, and then you'll have less of the presenteeism and absenteeism. So there's record sick leave or people turning up half out of it. And I think it'll take a lull in the sequence of dramas for there to be some recharging of the workforce. So we really have to, I think, wait. In the meantime, it's just to try and navigate the system more patiently than usual and realise that it's a burnt out system at the moment.
Is there one more question before we finish? Well, feel free to ask your questions to AJ. I want to, on behalf of all of you, thank AJ not only for coming, but for keeping your boundaries so that you're still standing and for serving our community. It's a wonderful thing that you're able to still be a part of a system that probably more than ever, we've all seen it and touched on it, but hearing your reflections on it, it's tough out there. And so for you to drive an hour and a half here and an hour and a half home, we are so appreciative, and we've all gained considerable amounts of information that is going to be helpful to our everyday lives. So thanks, AJ. I would just like to add that it's a free morning tea. Feel free to stay. Our next lecture, as I said to you earlier, I'm going to have to put my glasses on so I can read the date. Our next public lecture is August 28 with Naomi Wolf and Andy Mitchell. But if you would like to explore in terms of the well-being, we had the physical and the spiritual. This is a safe place on a Sunday morning at 10:30 when we run our normal services, a safe place to explore questions. We won't necessarily ram answers down your throat. We are all part of the questions and finding that connection outside of the earthly, the normal, the day-to-day. So you're welcome to come along on a Sunday morning. Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it, and enjoy morning tea.